Hello, my name is Keith Roberts, and I am here to share the Week 5 attending presentation. We're talking about certain things that would go along a typical storyline, and we were asked to answer a few questions. I'll read those questions and I'll give those answers to you according to my passage. I am in the book of Luke, chapter 4, verse 31 through 44. Where Jesus begins his day in the synagogue. The scene then goes from there to Simon Peter's house, where his mother-in-law is sick, and then it leaves, as he leaves her house, literally people come to him all night long with sicknesses, diseases, people possessed with devils, and through the evening till daybreak the next morning, he is in the thrones of these people, healing and casting these devils out. Finally finding himself a place to get alone just for a moment, and then again bombarded by people that had come to ask him to stay. And of course he tells them that he must leave and go to other cities and do what he's done. But to get to the questions, the first question was asked, begin with the ordinary settled world at the beginning of the story. If we have any type of order in our lives, typically we can departmentalize our life by daily activities or daily tasks. Monday is grocery shopping day. Tuesdays and Fridays we take the trash out to the street to be picked up, etc. Of all the days, none are more ritualistic, I don't think, than the day that we choose to worship. In this particular case, it was on the Sabbath day, being the Jewish culture. Many families have big Sunday dinners. That would not have been the case in an Orthodox Jewish family, because they minimized their day of worship so that it would be nothing that would be or resemble work. So they could only walk so far in a day. I mean, if they're good practicing Jews, they minimized their work, and they did things to maximize the rest part of their Sabbath day. And traditionally, the Sabbath was a planned, orchestrated day of certain events. Because it was so limited what they could do or where they could go, because it was the Sabbath day, their day of rest. It was a very micromanaged, very controlled day. And so things needed to stay in a particular order to make the Sabbath day be comfortable for them to worship in it and feel like they were being a good Jewish culture. So to answer the question, the ordinary settled world, in this particular case on this day, it was a very particular, meticulous day, and each detail given, each time frame, things done in certain ways, certain times, and it had been that way week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, and century after century. It had not changed. The second question was, when do you see any hint of trouble unfolding in the story? The hint of trouble is not the trouble itself, and I thought about this question. The first hint of trouble that we find in my passage was in the synagogue, when a disruption begins to take place during the reading by the priest. Jesus is ministering this particular morning at the synagogue. He's probably reading from the scrolls. Doesn't say exactly what he's doing, but he's reading from, if it's traditional, he's reading from the scrolls, some passage, some prophet, some part of the Torah. And as he's reading this, the first hint of trouble is a commotion outside of the normal reading. Without going any further on that, we'll come back to it later, but I would say that first hint is when something transpires that disrupts their tradition. Another hint of trouble was entering into the home of Peter and seeing people standing around whispering and the look of concern on their face. Didn't say I'm not saying what the trouble was, but the hint of trouble would be to see these people as you're walking in and the grave looks that they have, and to know that something is desperately wrong in the home. And the last to mention would be the desperation and the hopelessness that was felt in Simon Peter's home being multiplied over and over as sick and needy crowds began to gather outside of his home there with Jesus at nightfall. And that's the hint. The trouble is there. Thrones of people began to surround themselves around Jesus looking for an answer. The third question is, what is the real trouble that finally arrives in the text? Going back to the synagogue at the beginning. In the synagogue, the real trouble arises when the voice of a demon captures the attention of those there to worship. The reading of scrolls by Jesus is interrupted, and evil was given voice for all to hear. Their traditions have been violated. The second would be again in the home of Peter. The real trouble arrives when we find out that the looks of concern on their faces and the whispering of their concerns is that Peter's mother-in-law is dying. She is dying, and there seems to be no cure for her sickness. She's not getting well. She's not getting better. And they are looking for the worst. And as for trouble showing up at nightfall, if a single demon in the synagogue causes disruption, and one woman being sick, and all these people attending to them and the things that transpired during that period of time, if one demon and one sickness seemed to be a lot, now there are those same other demons and other different diseases multiplied over and over again coming to Jesus, and there seemed to be no end. They just keep coming and keep coming to him. The fourth is, and we begin to feel a little better because it's kind of dark on those first three questions, but the fourth question kind of brings a glimmer of hope and light. How does this story move toward resolution? Does help come from outside, or do we learn something that helps us deal with the trouble? Again, in the synagogue, we ask a question to illuminate the resolution. Question: what would have happened had Jesus not been there? What would a priest, or what would these people do had this possessed man come in and began to disrupt as he was doing here during Jesus' sermon or teaching that he's giving to the crowd? What had Jesus not been there? Could you even begin to imagine the fiasco that could have transpired had Jesus, the Son of God, had not been there to speak with authority? The resolution to the problem was Jesus. That's the resolution. There's no, what can we learn from this to help us? The bottom line is Jesus was the resolution. And at Simon Peter's house, if we were to ask that same question, what would have happened had Jesus not been there? Answer there would have been a funeral. There would have been a funeral. There would have been a death in the family. There would have been sadness and mourning and the things that the absence that is felt and when a life is gone from before us, a loved one, our friend. There would have been a funeral had Jesus not been there. But the resolution of the problem echoes the same as the first. Jesus. Jesus was the resolution for the problem. And at nightfall, when we see the real trouble arrive, it's not just a demon or just sickness, it's hundreds of demons and all kinds of diseases But the answer stays the same as before. The answer and the resolution is Jesus. And the fifth thing, what is the new, resituated world that we can imagine at the end of the story? The new, resituated world is a rather simple one to explain. It is now a world with Jesus in it. And Jesus is still the answer. No matter what the problems are or how many problems there are, Jesus is still the answer. Thank you for spending time to listen to this, and I hope you have a blessed day.